This is Melissa, and today is the 22nd of December, 2024, and the year is flying out. For those of you who celebrate Christmas, I hope that you're having a peaceful and easy and reflective time. And if you don't, I'm wishing you all the best. I want to thank everyone right off the bat who has been supportive since I said I needed help. And I appreciate those of you who've been able to donate and place an order. And also those of you who've just sent encouraging, thoughtful emails. That really helps me and keeps me going, I think. So I wanted to mention that when I said that the German translation of Waiting for the Miracle was ready to go, I said I had actually transcribed this years ago, and volunteers had volunteered to put it into Portuguese and Spanish. And Alan wasn't the best at remembering to tell you all that you could order. Sometimes I reminded him, and as the years wore on and I reminded him more regularly, he did get better about it. But I was just looking at the books, the stacks of books, and I've never had an order. We've never had an order for the Portuguese translation. And there were a couple of people who got the Spanish translation. But yippee, 3 people in 2 weeks have ordered the German copy of Waiting for the Miracle. This is the transcript book form of the talks that Alan did with Jackie Petru on Sweet Liberty in the late 90s into the early 2000s. These talks have never been available for free download on the website. They were only available for sale as discs. And so I encourage you, if you speak Spanish or Portuguese or German, please do order one of these books. It just makes me so happy to package them up. But in sharing, someone shared a little snippet of a blurb that Alan did back in 2007 when he was asking people to order. So I'm just going to read it. This is from 4 May 2007. And he said, "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Alan Watt giving you this weekly blurb. And before I go into the blurb, someone suggested to me that many people download what I have for free on the website. But I never mention on the blurbs, which they pass around, that I have books and CDs and DVDs for sale." A little light went on, and I said, gee, he's right. I should maybe try this because these talks go all over the world and are passed from person to person. And really, I don't push myself at all. And it's coming to the stage where, of course, you have to do this because we can't live on fresh air. Not that we can find fresh air these days, but it's becoming more difficult. Remember, I do have things for sale, which you can find on the website with the prices and so on. And I wanted to mention that for years, the only thing that Alan had on the website for free download in the video department was Reality Check 1, the first Reality Check video that he did. And that's been available for free download forever. But since his passing, I have added a few things in the video section, and I will make an image for those of you who watch this in video form so that you can see what page this is on. Alan did an interview recorded on video for Sovereign Independent and for InfoWars, sent a crew up for a day and a half, and there was a lot of footage recorded that they turned that into 2-part video. And I have uploaded all that to the website, so that's available for free. And I'm saying this because I know that a lot of you don't have the economic means to purchase books or discs or flash drives or DVDs. And I want you to know that Alan's audios, almost all of them, I've just mentioned some excluded, but almost all of the talks that he's ever given are available at cuttingthroughthematrix.com for free download. And I really encourage you to take advantage of that. Supporting me and keeping me going is great, but for those of you who can't, most important is that Alan's work be heard. So, moving on, I wanted to say that choosing this Redux for today was so difficult, and it really never is for me. I mean, the ideas for what to play just sort of seem to drop in my lap. I either just go to my list and my database or the website and boom, there it is. Oh yeah, that's the one. Or a listener will send me a suggestion. And like I said, easy. But this week I have struggled with it. I've probably listened to 4 full talks of Alan's and sampled bits and pieces of probably another 4 or 5, and just no, that's not what I'm looking for. And I'm not sure that I found the very best one for you this week, but here it is. December 21, 2010, Alan on RBN, and the title and poem, Truth. Discard as autumn sheds the leaf, the resinous glue of disbelief. It's not difficult to set up and micromanage a system preventing masses creating damage, using neuroscience and mind entrainment, bombarding messages via entertainment. Plus the old trick after birthing the nation, training the public in false mass education. Elites destined for function prior to birth have special schooling suited to worth, skilled in arts of being the leaders, lord over eager, servile bottom feeders. True facts of governance cannot be told, 'twould shake the reality which publics sold. So Prince just mentioned in A Real History with me a few weeks ago that one could get a real education just by reading Alan's poems, and that is true. So his theme here in this talk is that those who rule over us are really almost that separate species, because by food, nutrition, education, and so forth, these so-called elites are very different. They come out thinking quite differently to us here. As Alan said, the servile bottom feeders. I'm sure he meant that in the best possible way that one could be a servile bottom feeder. Now, I'll just say that I will have to cut a few things for that channel because Alan really got into the heart of the matter, which is how much they don't like us, they hate us, and they don't want as many of us. And he gets into the nuts and bolts of how that happens. And so that makes this just not right for that channel. So I'll try to shave it as little as possible for you, but you are going to miss some things, and hopefully in context you'll figure out what you're missing. And you can always go somewhere else to hear it complete. I was looking at all of the different news links that he mentioned in this talk, and a couple of them were dead links, and they were, forever dead because I could not find them on the Wayback Machine. And there were a couple that I was able to source either on the Wayback Machine, or if not, I was able to get comparable, similar subject matter. And one of the things that had gone missing, surprise, surprise, was the history of biological. And this is a really good comprehensive piece here. Maybe missing a few elements, but there's a lot to be learned from it. And I found it on the Wayback Machine, the Internet Archive. So I will post a link for that. And then there were 2 articles about the sad state of UK health services and cutbacks for NHS treatment, patients being denied what they called lifestyle procedures. And I was able to find part of a study on the British Medical Journal. You've got to log in or subscribe to see it all, but you'll at least get the point of it. And when I was looking at that, it reminded me of a documentary that I saw a while back that was done in 2019 by John Pilger, entitled "The Dirty War on the NHS." And John Pilger was an Australian journalist who passed away just about a year ago. And Alan posted to his work a fair bit over the years, so I will post that as well. So I'm just going to run through here really quickly, tell you a couple of things, and then additions. The death betting that Alan mentioned, they like to bet on when we're going to die. So the actuaries go into how people actually trade this information on the stock market like anything else. And when people live longer than they were expected to, people can lose money. So evidently there was some scandals around a Texas company, and I believe that was the original article was called Life Partners. It may have been a different one, but I did find several people who are still participating in this kind of thing. It's a thing. So there were some articles out there that were behind paywalls. Bloomberg, for instance, had a behind the paywall article on this thing of betting on when we die. So I'll post some new ones there. And then students were protesting because of tuition, and this just may be a never-ending story. It's some people pay an awful lot to be brainwashed and have their brains squared by the education system. Another article that Alan mentioned, which had gone missing from the internet, was from February of 2010 from the Nelson A. Rockefeller Institute of Government, University of Albany. And it appears to have been, because I think I did find it on the way back, a listing of what were called faith-based social services, taking stock, the Bush faith-based initiative, and what lies ahead. And on the Wayback Machine, it appears that those programs and social services that were being profiled here, faith-based social services, are available via the Wayback Machine. So Getting a Piece of the Pie is the title of one. Getting a Piece of the Pie, Federal Grants to Faith-Based Social Service Organizations. And I'm just going to say a word about faith-based. I am able to hear via different members of my family who are regular churchgoers the I would say shenanigans, but that's not a strong enough word. The awful way in which these organizations have participated in the last few years, with to our detriment, to the detriment of the faithful, if you want to put it that way. So one thing that I saw, I was just looking at the World Health Organization, and I saw this article. It appeared to have been a first. That's what they were bragging about here. WHO teams up with Adventists in a global first. So this was from 2015. The World Health Organization and the Seventh-day Adventist Church are kicking off an unprecedented global partnership aimed at reducing infant and maternal mortality rates. This is the first time that the WHO, the Public Health Agency of the United Nations, has partnered with a faith-based organization on a global scale, said someone who is the WHO's lead nurse and main proponent of the 5-year project. So, the WHO approached the Adventist Church with the proposal of the project after a major health conference organized by the church in Geneva, Switzerland. So the WHO had identified a global lack of qualified midwives, and this was factoring into the deaths of mothers and babies. So on the surface of it, that sounds really good, doesn't it? To help babies and mothers survive. I just kept going, and I found now that they've broadened out. So this is from the World Health Organization website. And it said here that the WHO convenes the faith network with the goals to increase access to accurate and relevant information and build a community of collaborative sharing on topics related to health emergency preparedness and response, and the intersection between faith and public health. Well, let me tell you, that's an intersection I want to avoid. The WHO Faith Network was formalized in early 2022 with over 50 partners representing a diversity of faiths, including service providers, faith leaders, faith-based organizations, and academic institutions. So I'll post that up, but I wanted to remind you about New York Governor Hochul or whatever her name is. Back in September 2021, she tells Christian worshipers, God wants you to. So she told Christian parishioners on Sunday that God wants them to. Hochul, who assumed office last month after Governor Andrew Cuomo resigned amid controversy, made the remark while speaking with worshipers at the Christian Cultural Center in Brooklyn. Yes, I know they're the smart ones, but you know, there are people out there who aren't listening to God and what God wants. You know this. You know who they are, Hochul said. I need you to be my apostles. I need you to go out and talk about it and say, we owe this to each other. We love each other. Jesus taught us to love one another. And how do you show that love? But to care about each other enough to say, please give because I love you. I want you to live. So one of the things that one of my family members was telling me was that a church, their church had said at the national level that their stance on these things and other questions or situations was that they should rely on the Bible and sacred writings and peer-reviewed literature. Well, good luck there with that. As Neil Foster said today when he sent me this article, they never give up. This is from December 2024. December 20, 2024. I missed a 20, I think. I wanted to read a little part of an article. I'll get there. I'll post all of these things to the best of my ability to reconstruct what Alan was talking about and what I have added in there. And, in the news, some things feels like deja vu all over again. Saudi doctor who crashed into German Christmas market, killing at least 5, is an anti-Islam activist. So evidently he was a refugee from Saudi Arabia. He worked as a doctor and a psychotherapist. So, I don't know that we're going to get the true story on this, but it's interesting. If he was anti-Islam, he certainly chose. It's a sad thing to do. 5 dead and 200 at least injured. So that's just an interesting way to lash out against Islam, I think. In this talk, Alan discusses the military's use of video games for training, the weaponization of video games and computers in general for young people, young boys especially, but young children. And this is probably really the whole purpose for video games. In this talk, Alan reads a fair bit from Bertrand Russell's book. He reads a fair bit from Bertrand Russell's book, The Scientific Outlook. And this is where Bertrand Russell is describing that basically those who rule over us will have a very different education than we have. So I was just doing a little searching around the internet, and I stumbled on this article, which ties in a little bit to the talk that I did not play, and quite a bit with the talk that I did. And I'll see, I don't want to take too long, but I'm going to see if I can read much of this for you, and then I will post the rest. This comes from the Executive Intelligence Review, which is the publication of Lyndon LaRouche, the LaRouche Group, and it was written in May of 2000, the May 5, 2000 issue of Executive Intelligence Review. From Cybernetics to Littleton, Techniques of Mind Control. The $9 billion a year video game industry in America, which contributed mightily to the carnage at Littleton, Paducah, and Jonesboro, is far more than the mere commercial exploitation of techniques and technologies developed as, quote, legitimate training instruments for the military and law enforcement agencies. To understand the roots of this new form of Manchurian Candidate programmed terrorism, it is necessary to go back to World War II and the immediate post-war period when there was a concerted effort launched by the Frankfurt School and the London Tavistock Institute to use the Marxist Freudian perversion of psychology and other social sciences as instruments for mass social control and brainwashing. The 2 pillars of the assault on the American intellectual tradition were cybernetics and the drug counterculture. At that time, a number of prominent social scientists openly spelled out their goal of using the wartime-tested techniques of mass psychological manipulation to pervert and control the American people. And in most instances, their emphasis was on children and the need to destroy the fabric of family life. Lord Bertrand Russell, who joined with the Frankfurt School in this effort at mass social engineering, spilled the beans in his 1951 book, The Impact of Science on Society. He wrote, "Physiology and psychology afford fields for scientific technique which still await development. 2 great men, Pavlov and Freud, have laid the foundation. I do not accept the view that they are in any essential conflict, but what structure will be built on their foundations is still in doubt. I think the subject which will be of most importance politically is mass psychology. Its importance has been enormously increased by the growth of modern methods of propaganda. Of these, the most influential is what is called education. Religion plays a part, though a diminishing one. The press, the cinema, and the radio play an increasing part. It may be hoped that in time, anybody will be able to persuade anybody of anything if he can catch the patient young and is provided by the state with money and equipment. And that is that, especially that last part of that quote is one that Alan Watt has shared with us numerous times. Russell continued, the subject will make great strides when it is taken up by scientists under a scientific dictatorship. The social psychologists of the future will have a number of classes of school children on whom they will try different methods of producing an unshakable conviction that snow is black. Various results will soon be arrived at. First, that the influence of home is obstructive. Second, that not much can be done unless indoctrination begins before the age of 10. Third, that verses set to music and repeatedly intoned are very effective. That's music. Fourth, that the opinion that snow is white must be held to show a morbid taste for eccentricity, but I anticipate it is for future scientists to make these maxims precise and discover exactly how much it costs per head to make children believe that snow is black and how much less it would cost to make them believe it is dark gray. Russell concluded with a warning. Although this science will be diligently studied, it will be rigidly confined to the governing class. The populace will not be allowed to know how its convictions were generated. When the technique has been perfected, every government that has been in charge of education for a generation will be able to control its subjects securely without the need of armies or policemen. Now, scrolling down here and looking at the clock at the same time, I see that I really don't want to read the whole article to you because it is too long, but this is a very good one. The author gets into Huxley, Leary, the experimentation with psychotropic drugs in the 1950s, the authoritarian personality, the writing of this book that came out of the Frankfurt School, the people who were involved in writing that, Adorno, Horkheimer, Eros, I'm skipping down just a little bit because this is interesting. Eros was precisely the weapon that the Frankfurt School and their fellow travelers employed over the next 50 years to create a cultural paradigm shift away from the so-called authoritarian matrix of man in the living image of God, the sanctity of the nuclear family, and the superiority of the republican form of nation-state over all other forms of political organization. So, of course, they would use the dehumanizing drug abuse, sexual perversion, and the glorification of violence. And he even writes here what Alan Watt has told us repeatedly. For the Marxist Freudian revolutionaries of the Frankfurt School, the ultimate antidote to the hated Western Judeo-Christian civilization was to tear that civilization down from the inside by turning out generations of necrophiliacs. And I have said I don't like that term Judeo-Christian because I know that it was coined also in the 20s, but there you go. There certainly has been an attack on our culture. So the sections of the article that I didn't read were the authoritarian personality, and then liberation through drug abuse, and the cybernetics group. And that Alan in this talk mentioned the Macy group, the Macy Foundation, and their meetings on cybernetics, etc. And this has gone into in good detail, including the people who participated in that. And then keep in mind that this EIR article from LaRouche was written in the year 2000. And here is a section called Computers and Artificial Intelligence. For John von Neumann and Norbert Wiener, the core of the Cybernetics Group project was the development of computers and the prospect of combining high-speed computers with so-called artificial intelligence to literally, quote, program the human race. The next section is LSD freaks meet cyber hackers. And there's some characters here that Alan Watt has also talked about at length, and I have mentioned subsequently. Stuart Brand is key here. He's one of those, I think the title of one of his books or publications or something, I linked to this a couple of years ago, was something like, we will be or we are as gods, so we might as well get good at it. So that is going to be me cutting myself off here now for you. Also letting you know that on Christmas Day, you can expect something from me. So that is Wednesday, December 25. And it is actually, I say something from me, but it's really the gift of a listener to me, which I will give to you. And that will be on the 25th. And I will be back again next Sunday after Christmas with another Redux. And I wish you all well. Thank you.
Hi folks, I'm Alan Watt and this is Cutting Through the Matrix on December the 21st, 2010. As always, I get it out the way to begin with at the start of the show. I tell you to go into cuttingthroughthematrix.com, that's my website, the main website, and bookmark all the sites you see listed there. If you find sticking on downloads of audios on the com site, try these alternate sites because so many folk go into the com site at the same time, and that can cause a problem once in a while. Now remember, all the sites listed have the audios for download of hundreds of shows I've given in the past. We're trying to give you shortcuts to the reality in which you're living. And they all carry transcripts in English of a lot of the talks as well for print up, which you can read. A lot of people prefer to read, and it is better too to go over things. If it's written, you remember it better really later on. And remember too that you are the audience that bring me to you. I don't bring on advertisers to sell products and so on. I simply depend upon you to keep me going, and it's up to you if you want to, because there's other things I could certainly do, especially in this time that we've gone through. I came on the air because I had enough knowledge to dispel the myths that we're going through, even in the Patriot community, and fill in the facts of the big world project that was already underway. It had been before I was born, or my parents, in fact, were born. And I try to fill in the gaps and give you a head start for those who are interested. And not everyone can handle it. They refuse to go any further, even if you have the authors who took part in the big projects writing in their own memoirs and their own biographies about the big plans and agendas which were already underway. Most folk can't handle the truth, and it's a sad comment. But if you want to buy the books and discs I have for sale, which keeps me going, go into cuttingthroughmatrix.com. And from the US to Canada, you can use a personal check. You can also use an international postal money order from your post office. You can use cash, send cash, or you can use PayPal to order. Just press the donate button, put an appropriate amount, and you find at the com how to do that and how much there is and so on, or things cost. And follow it by an email with your name, address, and the order, and hopefully I'll get it out to you as quick as I can. Mail is slow at this time of year, especially with all the supposed added security. They're checking every little thing, and it's become an absolute farce, really. Never send anything first-class mail. It makes no difference what you send it. I'll get there at the same time. Same with registered envelopes, too. It'll take sometimes longer because anything registered might be suspicious, you see, and they'll hold it at the border for later inspection. So we're going through the farce, I call it, of the changeover from one reality into the next regimented authoritarian reality, and that's what's happening in this world. Now remember, too, across the rest of the world, to order the books, just again send the donation followed by an email with name, address, and the order. I'll get it out to you. You can also use MoneyGram, I think, which can wire, or it can be given to you in a check form. You post it off, takes 7 days, and for those who can wait, it's worth it. It's worth it because it saves you some cash. So it's all up to you how you want to order them. But these books are different. The talks certainly are different, and I fill in a lot of gaps that the mainstream will keep away from you. The mainstream isn't there to inform you. It's meant to really control you and keep you in the fake reality, and even give you what become your opinions as you go from one reality into the next. They will become your opinions, designed by experts, of course. Back with more after this break. Hi, folks. We're back, and we're cutting through the matrix. It is astonishing how you're born into this system, which is well underway, and every generation takes the system in which they're born for granted. They think it could only be this way. How else could it be? That's all they know. And if their parents don't know themselves that the whole system is rigged, and you live in a more sophisticated form of slavery, as Charles Galton Darwin said, then, of course, they can't pass it on to the child. And then you go into education, and their first job is to make you uniform, standardize you, make you into linear thinkers until you can't see any particular objective means to get to a problem. You're not taught to look at things from many angles and be very critical in your logic and how to arrive at various conclusions until you get the proper conclusion on any topic. And all this was known a long time ago. I've gone through the histories of some of the big people involved in setting up the very system we're seeing emerge now. And many of them lived in the early 1900s and before. And before them, too, there were other groups who went under various names and various organizations all working together towards bringing in the 20th century. But as I say, this particular century has worked out long in advance, and some of the higher players who attended the think tanks came out with their books, knowing that the general population would never catch on to what they're actually saying. Most people won't read them, of course. They're too dry and boring for them. And the ones who do catch on see the exoteric, because, you see, they write in an exoteric way for the public. It's like the Bible. It paints pictures in your head, and you'll say, I agree with this, and I agree with that, and I agree with this. And you don't realize that there's also another story underneath it. You never stand back and say, well, what kind of person is actually writing this book? They don't seem to have the kind of compassion necessary to mix even with society as you know it. That never enters most folks' heads. They simply become followers. So-and-so said this, Bertrand Russell said that, and they worshipped him as an actual hero. He had lots of the working class on board with them, and they never figured out that he planned to have them working in slavery eventually, and he wanted to annihilate a lot of them too, to bring down the population. We always hear about Adolf Hitler, who's always pointed out as the only bad guy that ever existed. And, of course, that's not true at all, because the boys that brought you Adolf Hitler gave you Lenin and Stalin and other ones too, up to the present time. And the reason you always know this is because you can read between the lines to say the esoteric and put two and two together. And what you'll find too with the big boys who all work together and go to global think tanks and work out and hammer out all the problems of how to implement their schemes and their agendas into the phases, you'll find out that they all come out with the same views on things and the same necessities on things, especially depopulation and a controlled, scientifically run society. That's what you're going into now. Authoritarianism, the Club of Rome, as I say, talked about this too many, many years ago. It's a top think tank for the United Nations. And I've given out the membership list before and various other things about them. If you want to find out stuff, go into my archives and do a lot of digging. And even if you get the wrong one at first and you listen to the audio, believe you me, you still learn something from it before you hit the right one. But here's Bertrand Russell, who belonged to a group, many groups actually, and he belonged to the Macy group later on that was authorized by the President of the US to bring in a system of total control over the population, because you see, they blamed the people for all the world's ills, including wars. Now, the average person and peasant, of course, who's busy digging up potatoes, is the last thing on his mind is going off to war. It's done by the very ruling class that end up blaming you over and over again. But they looked at all the different methods of controlling this public who need diversions through entertainment, especially when you crowd them together. And, of course, they said they'd have to use entertainment as a method of controlling the public, because that's where you get most of your opinions, your thoughts from, is fiction, in other words. But they also talked about massive depopulation eventually, and you find out, you catch on when they're writing about what's to come, some of the things were already established, maybe 100, 200 years beforehand. And these particular characters were products of the very eugenics program which they were promoting. Here's what Bertrand Russell said in The Scientific Outlook on page 244, which was written in 1931. Now, what he's saying here is exactly the same format that they were looking for in the Soviet Union. They wanted the Soviet man, the perfectly indoctrinated, scientifically created Soviet being who would be obedient like a robot to the government. And here's Russell talking about the same thing. And then, of course, the Germans picked up on it too. There's nothing that Germany picks up on that wasn't born in London. Nothing. But here's he says in the Scientific Outlook, he says, these children, on the other hand, who are destined to become members of the governing class, will have a very different education. Now listen carefully to this. They will be selected, some before birth. Now think about this. For the harder thinking, I'll repeat that last part. Some before birth, some during the first 3 years of life, and a few between the ages of 3 and 6. All the best known science will be applied to the simultaneous development of intelligence and willpower. Eugenics, chemical and thermal treatment of the embryo, and the diet in early years, now think about that, after all the shows I've given you on the junk we're all fed, in the early, will be used with a view to the production of the highest possible ultimate ability. The scientific outlook will be instilled from the moment that a child can talk, and throughout the early impressionable years, the child will be carefully guarded from contact with the ignorant and unscientific, that's the general public. From infancy up to 21, scientific knowledge will be poured into him, and at any rate, from the age of 12 upwards, he will specialize in those sciences for which he shows the most aptitude. See, Russell was a product of this himself. So were the Huxleys. I've gone through the history of the Huxleys and their special inbreeding programs. At the same time, he will be taught physical toughness. He will be encouraged to roll naked in the snow. They like nakedness, these guys. They have a lot in common. To fast occasionally for 24 hours, to run many miles on hot days, to be bold in all physical adventures, and uncomplaining when he suffers physical pain. That's the same thing, of course, that Germany in World War II, before World War II, implemented. And they got the ideas from this group. From the age of 12 upwards, he will be taught to organize children slightly younger than himself, and will suffer severe censure if groups of such children fail to follow his lead. They're taught to be born leaders, you see. And actually, the born leader is the proper term. A sense of his high destiny will be constantly set before him, and loyalty to his order will be axiomatic, that it will never occur to him to question it. Every youth will thus be subjected to a threefold training: in intelligence, in self-command, and in command over others. If he should fail in any one of these three, he will suffer the terrible penalty of degradation to the ranks of common workers, and will be condemned for the rest of his life to associate with men and women vastly inferior to himself in education and probably in intelligence. The spur of this fear will suffice to produce industry in all but a very small minority of boys and girls of the governing class. Now, as I say, that was already on the go, and he was a product of this. The Huxleys were too. In fact, Julian Huxley talked about the same thing, and they were the end product of inbreeding with initially two families, constantly inbreeding for generations, and then a third one, the Galtons, added to it. The Darwins, Galtons, and of course they brought in a couple of other ones later on as well, for fresh blood, since so many morons were born out of them. But for all the morons that were born, they also had the occasional supposed genius, but they had special education and kept apart from the average person, the commoners, to the age of 21 or so. This has been on the go for a long time. Plato talked about it in the Republic, and they all quote Plato, all of them. And in the Scientific Outlook 2 on page 252, which is on breeding of the governing class, he also says, if we were right in supposing the scientific society will have different social grades according to the kind of work to be performed, we may assume also that it will have uses for human beings who are not of the highest grade of intelligence. That manual workers in general will be bred for patience and muscle rather than for brains. And that's where Aldous Huxley got his idea from. They're all communicating with each other and attending the same think tanks. The governors and experts, on the contrary, will be bred chiefly for their intellectual powers and their strength of character. Assuming that both kinds of breeding are scientifically carried out, there will come to be an increasing divergence between the two types, making them in the end almost different species. And a lot of that's already happened, as I say. Have you ever wondered about these guys that are suddenly supposedly instant whiz kids with the computers who just get banged up there? Never heard of them before, of course. You'll never get their schooling records from them, or never mind the school they went to. And I'm sure some of these really are especially coached and trained for their actual role. As he says here, they're given their role and what will be expected of them and what they'll actually do. It's all laid out for them, and the doors open for them too. That's already happened, as I say. We're there. We are there. And it's been on the go for a long time, not just in one country or so, but in all the main countries across the world. And that's also why, of course, in this system, as you go through the next phase of bringing down, you don't need all these students anymore in schools getting a better education, even though it's not the top education. You don't need that. So read this article about students and cutbacks after this, because it ties in together. Back in a moment. Hi folks, we're back, and this is Cutting Through the Matrix. Going over some of the writings of those who have written this part that we're going through now, the agenda for this part. They partook in the various high-level meetings, knowing exactly where they were going with the world, being absolutely confident they could pull it off, because, you see, they were backed by the wealthiest people on the planet. And those wealthiest people were the ones who owned all the resources of those things which are called wealth. They owned all the gold mines, all the diamond mines, and everything else, you see, that they gave us to call wealth. And it works very well, especially this time of year when everybody's going crazy buying gold and diamond presents and all that nonsense to make the same characters who helped sink you before with the banks even richer again. But again, you can't stop a lifetime of training, and everyone's been trained to spend. The world must be okay if we can still spend and buy the same junk. But anyway, here's what students in UK, you know that in Britain they've had riots with the students who they're getting massive cutbacks in their funding and all the rest of it, because they don't need them anymore, you see. And it's time now to really bring in the two types of classes that Russell was talking about, the ones who are specially bred, specially educated and all the rest, which run the world, and they'll need a fewer from the lower universities. They used to call them the red brick universities, the ones they built for the commoners after World War II to make them happy. But they'll keep a few of those around too, to be the bureaucrats and so on. but not the leaders. But in Britain, here's what's happening now, and the students, of course, are rioting because once you get something from the government, which is all from your taxes anyway, we always think it should always be that way. And it says your student fee savings will fund windmills in Africa. That's where the money is to go for those. Now, back in the 70s, the students would have been all for that. It didn't come from their savings, of course, the money. But yeah, we should build windmills in Africa and all that kind of stuff, as we're all being taught to be awfully global. But it says here the £2.9 billion the government will save by increasing tuition fees matches the amount earmarked for a global warming project, finds Christopher Booker. By the way, they've got the army out in Britain now to try to rescue people and clear the streets of snow, one of the largest snows they've had in an awful long time. And they've run out of grit because they're all counting on global warming, and it hasn't happened except in some people's imaginations. But it says here, the cause of the major political story last week, the row over tuition fees, students rioting and all, was, as we all know, public spending cuts. But how much money does the government actually hope to save on tuition fees? If the immediate problems are massive state deficit, it seems odd that the government should risk such an unpopularity, not for any immediate saving, but in the hope that it will get the money back over the next 30 years as students can afford to repay it. In the short term, the government's own projection as to how much it will save is that the funding of university tuition will be cut by £2.9 billion by 2014. As it happens, £2.9 billion is a sum ring-fenced by the same public spending review to be given to developing countries to help them fight global warming with windmills and solar panels. It also is slightly less than the £3 billion by which our public debt is rising every week. These much vaunted cuts are not all we are led to believe. So it's quite something, as I say, as you go into this particular phase. And all you have to do now is get over the riots and get trained to fight with people flipping burgers and stacking Walmart shelves and stuff like that, because that's all that's going to be left as we get crowded into the cities and taken down through various means, which are all on the go. And Christmas cheer is amazing too, because I love how they change society so easily. Bernays was awfully correct when he said that there's nothing you can't do. There's nothing you can't do with the general public. There's nothing you can't make them do, believe, or whatever. He was a master of it. He got the US to go and have a war to save a private corporation in Latin America that was one of his biggest money incomes for advertising. But and I've gone through that too before, and that was I think it was in the Century of the Self by Curtis. He goes through that. You can find it still up on YouTube. They're yanking so much off YouTube now as you go into the new laws. It's just so darn quick. So if you don't have copies of things or whatever, you're out of luck. But it says here, and I went through this too, watching them going to happy holidays instead of Merry Christmas. And it was so strange after you're thinking of a country that had centuries and centuries of Merry Christmas, being told to say happy holidays, and they use the celebrities to do it all for them, because the public always follow the stars. That's what you get given, Same in the military, if you get shot or something, you get a little star, a little tin star, because we follow stars. So they give us celebrities as stars, and we mimic what they do and say, because then you want to be cool in with the crowd, you see. It says Chase orders Southlake Bank to remove Christmas tree. This is Chase Bank. It says, Chase Bank told a Texas businessman to remove the Christmas tree he donated to a local branch because it could offend people. Oh, everybody's offended today. You know what? Everybody's offended. Unless you talk political correct speech all the time, which is hard to do. There's a technique to it. And it's almost like you have to never answer something directly or quickly. Always slow down and play it through your mind what you're going to say. Analyze it, reformulate it, edit it, and then say something. Or just nod your head. Because that's how bad it's getting now. And you actually get fined for things today just by making a comment. It's quite something. But I'll read the rest of this and you get a chuckle or a dismay depending on how you see it when we come back from these messages. Hi folks, we're back and this is Cutting Through the Matrix. Talking about a bank which was given a Christmas tree and it was decorated and all the rest of it. And then the man who did it all and gave them the tree was told to take it down because people objected and they were offended by it, apparently. Imagine getting offended by a tree, eh? But anyway, anything goes these days. It says here, the bank referred questions to corporate offices. Greg Hassel, JP Morgan Chase spokesman, said the company's policy isn't anti-Christmas. Of course not. They want your dough, right? People wish their customers Merry Christmas when it's appropriate, he said. Well, this is the time when it's appropriate, I would think. Anyway, however, the rest of the time we're all happy, whatever else, happy holidays. However, to ensure that everyone who visits Chase branches feels welcome and comfortable, the bank's policy is to use only decorations supplied by the company. I wonder what they are. We appreciate the thoughtful gesture from Ms. Morales, Hassel said. Unfortunately, we're unable to keep it on display, the tree, because for the remainder of the holiday season, not the Christmas season. JP Morgan Chase ensures that decorations are something everyone is comfortable with, regardless of how they celebrate the season, Hassel said. But then it goes through, of course, others see it as a symbol of the season, which of course it is. It doesn't matter how far back it goes. You've even got Christian bunches too that say that's a pagan symbol and all the rest of it. But you can't please people anymore today. They're so incredibly diverse in their craziness that they're all fighting each other over a Christmas tree. I mean, see, tradition has to go, you understand. All tradition has to be destroyed to bring in the new stereotype where you've got happy holidays. That means nothing at all, really, doesn't it? A lot of folk aren't even on a holiday, so what does it mean, happy holidays? So it's quite something as they go through all this political correctness and people go along with it. They're all scared. Someone, in fact, was going to send me a cigar from the States and by regular post, and the woman at the post office wouldn't put her name on it and pass it because she was unsure about the tobacco laws if she sent this one cigar. Because there's so many laws on everything now that they're simply terrified of losing their jobs and all that kind of stuff. Things are getting nuts. Really nuts. But that's what it's supposed to be at this time as we go through the big change over. It keeps us all off guard too, the madness of it all. That's part of the technique that they're using. I'm also putting up tonight a link. In all these articles, remember, I give links at the end of the show at cuttingthroughthematrix.com, a link to, it's quite a good site as far as I can see here. I haven't gone through it all. But it does have some of the history of biological warfare, the different countries involved, and so on, and human experimentation. So others may have time to go through it in more depth than I have. I've really just glanced at it. There's a lot missing as well, I see from here, but they've done a good enough job of getting the basic things in. I'll put that link up tonight as well. And also, I'll put up a link to YouTube. And it's quite interesting too how the Obama administration has given the go-ahead for Latin American countries to come together in an effort and to try and I guess maybe sue Arizona for their anti-illegal immigration laws, which is a first for the American history where they're given, your own government's given the okay for other governments and nations to try and stop you from what you're doing within your own state and country. Quite interesting indeed, because we see we're all global now, and they did sign the NAFTA agreement and the free flow of goods and labor and all that kind of stuff, you see, which they try and keep under wraps. But we're all to be merged, as you all well know from this show, into a continent just like Europe, and well, all these trading blocks, these three big trading blocks will be under the United Nations initially, at least, until they dream up some other wonderful name for the same organization, which is just a front for those who already run the world with money and so on. And bring in a scientifically controlled society, or dictatorship, as Russell preferred to call it. I'm also putting up a link to, for years, people with Epstein-Barr syndrome, chronic fatigue syndrome, and a whole bunch of these syndromes that are too, mind you, but I think most of the now, I laugh too, because years ago I talked about computer games, even 10 years or more years ago. I was talking about computer games are made. I went through the history of them for the military to get them to not be emotional about killing is to make them kill without thought, just immediately, like a Pavlovian response. And they were given human targets initially, human-shaped targets instead of the old round target style. And then they went into computer games, of course. They even had ones during World War II that were run by a very fast-moving film for training those as tail gunners in the bombers. And they were fast enough at that time, those particular training techniques. But the computer games really went overboard with the military, because most folk they don't normally kill people, you see. And the military's job is to stop you from thinking about not killing people and to get you automatically to kill them without any thought at all. So it's only now that the mainstream are putting out this stuff. Why? Because most of the world's hooked on computer games, and it won't matter that I even read this. But it simply gives you an added strength to what you already knew, of course. And it says, computer games are dangerously addictive and contain powerful psychological devices designed to make some fans play compulsively. A panorama investigation will reveal tonight. I guess it's been revealed already. This was December the 6th. A simple technique based on a 1950s study of rats feeding themselves by pressing a lever. I've mentioned that before, which encourages repeat behavior by rewarding it at random, has effectively been adapted for use in gaming and is feared to encourage addiction. I know in Korea they've got an awful problem with it, and they have special schools they send them to when they're really found to be holed up in their room, just playing the same games over and over and over. They said the situation is so serious that the industry body, United Kingdom Interactive Entertainment, is now calling for more research on the issue and promising to publish advice for parents, helping them to look out for excessive and problem gaming traits in their children. What they do is they give you a random reward, just like the rats. The psychology left behind successful computer games is the same used in studies on lab rats in the 1950s. This is how far back they've known all this stuff. And then it says, the program Panorama Addicted to Games quoted award-winning computer games designer Adrian Hahn, Chief Creative Officer of Six to Start, who admitted that the technique once used in rats was now commonplace in computer games. He told the BBC in the 1950s, scientists discovered the rats, which had been trained to feed themselves by pressing a lever, would press it obsessively if the food was delivered randomly. People have discovered that this works on humans as well. If you give people a lever or a button to press and give them random rewards, they'll press it all the time. It's the same with scratching win tickets and stuff. You see them standing at counters, you're trying to get served, and they've got handfuls of this stuff, and they just drop them all on the floor as they scratch them off, and it's another dud. And it says, the rats would press a lever constantly to get their reward, which is food. It's the same principle with computer games. The technique called the variable ratio of reinforcement or operant conditioning, they use that in kindergarten, by the way, is simple but powerful and is thought to be one of the reasons people become addicted to slot machines. As Mr. Hahn added, I think people don't necessarily understand how powerful some game mechanics can be. These are designed by behaviorists and all these other control freaks who use incredible sciences of studying the mind. It's not just to sell the games, it's to program generations of children. See, the only reason they gave them out in America in a big, big way, and Britain elsewhere, was really for the upcoming generation. They needed to be the most debased generation in a long time, the least education, and the most violent, trained to be violent by bringing them up with nothing but games. They were already trained for the military. They're already trained. Once they get these weapons and so on, they'll just go killing and without ever thinking about it. I've even read articles here where there's a wing now in the American Air Force where they bring youngsters straight in, computer addicts straight in. They don't even have to learn to fly or do any of the usual stuff. They're given their wings and they sit and fly the drones because it's just another computer game to them. And those little dots on the screen that are really people are just little images generated by the computer. So they're awfully good at killing. Nothing happens by chance. Nothing at all. Nothing whatsoever happens by chance. Nothing. It all works together. And we're used, whole generations are used for one thing or another in the proper way, for those who rule the world. Now, there's an article too about the National Health Service that's coming to America. Hospital wards to shut in secret National Health Service cuts. Tens of thousands of National Health Service workers would be sacked. Hospital units closed and patients denied treatments under secret plans for 20 billion pounds of health cuts. 20 billion pounds. They've had nothing but cuts for years and years and years. The sick would be urged to stay at home and email doctors, that's if you've got a computer, I guess, rather than visit surgeries, while procedures such as hip replacements could be scrapped. The plans of emeritus health chiefs drop emergency budgets that cast doubt on pledges by Gordon Brown to protect frontline services in the National Health Service. Documents show that health chiefs are considering plans to begin sacking workers, cutting treatments and shutting wards across the country, it says here. And then I'll go on to this other one in the same theme. And it's from the Telegraph. Patients denied treatment as the National Health Service makes cutbacks. The Telegraph can disclose, because in other words, been told to disclose that to get us used to the idea of it. And it says, trusts around the country, they put a lot of these hospitals into what they call trusts now, are refusing to pay for operations ranging from hip replacements to cataract removal and wisdom tooth extraction. The health service is also tightening restrictions that prevent patients undergoing procedures for lifestyle reasons. Now, that was something that came out from the United Nations as they bring in the minimal care across the world. They say that everyone across the world is entitled to the basic minimal care. But in it too, they went through the fact that those who they claim brought on the problem by themselves should be the last to have treatment at all. And you know where that can go. It can go into anything at all. Smokers and obese patients are being denied operations until they change their habits, and trusts are delaying surgery and non-emergency treatments, the Telegraph has found in the most comprehensive snapshot of the National Health Service cuts yet. Now, they'll keep giving treatment and all these therapy rehabilitation places for booze, because there's a big income for the government, and also for cocaine and heroin, because that's another big boon for the banks and the governments as well. They've always been dealing with this stuff. In fact, the RCMP in Canada said years ago that if they stopped the drugs, the illegal drugs, money being laundered through the main banks, they'd all be bankrupt. I guess bankrupt again is what I should really say. So it says the cuts, which include the cancelling of MRI scans and X-rays, are taking place in defiance of the coalition. This is what they're calling the new government in Britain, this coalition of the two left-wing parties. One's called Conservative, the other one's called Liberal. Ministers are determined that frontline services should be protected and savings needed can be found from management costs and efficiencies. But they're definitely going all the way with it now. This is the UN agenda, by the way. And it'll also be the part of the faster kill. Now, I've read articles from the Rockefeller group that talked in their last big major meeting, where they said they've already helped to, basically they're inferring they've sterilized a lot of the population. They're not having children or can't have children, but it wasn't fast enough. Now they wanted to go into rapid depopulation. Well, this is the stage now where we're at. They're going into rapid depopulation as treatments are refused. And of course, if you eat too many Mars bars, and even if you're not overweight, they'll say you've taken in too much sugar, and that's what caused your problem. You can assign it to whatever is published in the Lancet Journal in a paper by some bigwig, and that's good enough. So, as it also says here, there's also growing evidence that National Health Service managers are sacrificing patient care instead of what they're being told to do. Doctors and nurses said the grim results undermine the myth that frontline services are being protected, and warned they were just a tip of the iceberg. The situation is going to get worse as the National Health Service struggles to save £20 billion over the next 4 years. Meanwhile, Britain's building roads in other countries, even Poland, under the EU, and getting massive fines from the EU if they don't go along with all the agendas that they're supposed to go along with now too. What a wonderful world we're in, isn't it? Free trade was going to bring everyone such freedom and a variety of things to buy and purchase. And, of course, it's gone the way it was supposed to go. It was all done in secrecy and lies and deception until they created the Parliament itself for Europe. What's new, eh? What's new? Now, for America, too, it's interesting. See, they also already knew this phase was coming upon us. And when Bush was in, he started off what was called faith-based social services. I'll put the link up for that too. And it's where supposedly any kind of organization, civil organization, will take over where government cash used to employ government people, right down to social workers or nurses and so on, to take care of those who couldn't afford it. So I'll read some of this when we come back from this break. Hi folks, we're cutting through the matrix, talking about really what is communitarianism under many different names as we go down the tubes basically into the scientifically controlled society and austerity measures and all the rest of it. Of course, there's an excuse given as well. But really this was designed a long time ago, all this stuff to come up and be introduced right now. And we're living through it, as I say. And this part of it is called faith-based social services. And people have heard about the faith-based initiatives and thought, oh, I guess that's something to do with religion and that's all it is. No, it's to do with also that the community takes care of those within the community with charitable associations and all the rest of it. So on this particular link I'll put up, you can look through it. It's got faith-based social services, taking stock, the Bush faith-based initiatives and what lies ahead. And also, of course, it goes into what changes Obama, or what will Obama add to it, in fact, what they'll keep and what they'll change. That's all done as well here. There's PDFs here, American Congregations and Social Service Programs, comparative views on the role and effect of faith in social services, a state of the law 2008, legal developments affecting government partnerships with faith-based organizations, getting a piece of the pie, federal grants to faith-based social service organizations, the policy and environment for faith-based social services in the United States. What's changed since 2002 is when, see, we're getting this ready years ago, before the supposed bank crash, when they pulled the plug at the right time, of course. And eventually it's all tying in with the new social health care system that's being introduced into the United States, where folk think they're going to get something for nothing. Barnum says there's one born every minute, eh? But that's the way it really is. And that's the real world, folks. We're under incredible micromanagement in every sector, but it's not difficult to do when the guys at the top are the guys who lend, supposedly, money to other nations and own so much of the world's resources, pretty well all of it, in fact, in reality. And there's nothing for them to have cash printed up or just move blips off a computer, add a few to it, and give it to this bunch of a think tank to deal with one aspect of controlling and manipulating and upgrading you. That's what it's all about, isn't it? And I'll also put up a link too to do with the insurance business. It ties in with the Wall Street movie, if you ever saw the Wall Street movie, and the newer Wall Street that took over from it, taking over from the last one, showing all the cons and how even the big bankers were starting up businesses or investments and betting against their own investment and reaping even more money from it. I mean, these guys, you just can't keep there's not a fly on these guys, as they say. You just can't keep up with their lovely, crooked thinking as you go around in circles. And we're all linear. We can't imagine how this is possibly done, as the wise guys just pull it off one thing after another. But this one here is about insurance policies and how they're selling the policies to other investors, betting on you dying so that they can claim the cash after a certain period. It's quite an interesting one. These companies are based in the US again. And it says odds skew against investors and bets on strangers' lives. It gives you the names of the companies, Life Partners Holdings, Inc. I've been doing it and literally selling it off just like stock to other guys, hoping you'll die within a certain time and collecting lots of cash for doing so. There's not a fly on these guys, as I say. It's amazing, isn't it? Well, from Hamish myself from Ontario, Canada, it's good night to me, your God, or your gods go with you.